Welcome to the 7th Contract Express webinar. Today's topic will be on author tips and tricks. Over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Nick. Let me share my screen. So the goal of this webinar is really just to speed up your automation by taking advantage of a number of lesser known features that can be used within Contract Express. So some of these might seem really obvious to some of you, but just in case there are some newbies that are joining today, the first thing I would recommend really is switching on the paragraph marker within Word. It might seem a bit busy on the screen, but once you get used to it, it's absolutely fine. And it really helps with identifying where you have things such as page or section breaks, which a lot of you might know can really get in the way of your automation. The other part is using a particular keyboard shortcut, which is Control, Shift, and plus, which will superscript your text, which is really useful for spans. So if we start typing our rule and then Control, Shift, and plus, we are now typing in superscript. And equally, you could use that button again to bring the text back down. So these are just things that you can use within Word. Now moving on to author itself. When you're working on a large template with a huge number of variables and especially computations, it can be quite difficult to navigate between your document and finding a specific variable. To alleviate that, if you select any variable in your template, you can then use the Go to Definition button. And this will bring up the variable within your list of variables. If you then wanted to find where that variable is in the questionnaire, you can right-click and choose Show in Questionnaire, which I haven't organized, so it is all in the Unallocated Variables folder. Now, looking at the template that I have here, you can see that we have a little amber alert going on, which means that there's a mistake that I have made somewhere. Looking at it, it says that tenant name is used in multiple repetition contexts. I'm sure you've all seen this error a huge number of times. It's the easiest mistake to make when you're automating. And the reason is that I have repeated my tenant details in the party details here, but I have also reused tenant name throughout the template without doing that. Now, again, this is a very simple template with little automation in it, but in something that is more complicated, it might be more difficult to find where the issue is. Now, the first thing that you will want to look at is the usage tab of your variable. If we refresh this, looking at the wrong one, tenant name, we will see that we have two different contexts, one where it is simply always relevant and one where it is repeated. Now, knowing this, we can say, OK, throughout the document, there are one or more instances where I have mistakenly not repeated my variable. You could go about fixing this one of two ways. The first would be to use the arrows in the dictionary to navigate between occurrences of tenant name. So clicking on this will navigate throughout the document. But equally, if the variable was reused hundreds of times, that might be a bit lengthy to do. And there is a way that you can, in a much simpler manner, find specifically which version of tenant name needs to have the repeat added to it. We can do this by using the Markup Editor. The Markup Editor is a pretty recent development, and I know that not too many people use it, but it has some really great features in it. One of them in particular is the ability to find the least or most repeated instance of a variable. So if I click on the Filter Markup button, I can then choose my tenant name variable. And then I can decide which particular instances I want to find, the most or least constrained, meaning however many number of rules it has over it, or most or least repeated. Now, knowing that tenant name should be repeated in my document, I will look for the least repeated versions of it. And again, use the arrows to find those occurrences. So we can see now that I have missed one of my repeats in the signatory box, which I can just add in. and another on the cover page. And now my errors are gone and the usage for tenant name is only one context, the repeated one. So again, looking at the dictionary editor, a new button that was introduced a few versions ago is the ability to automatically arrange the questionnaire. So if I press this and choose Perform Usage Analysis to make sure that everything is up to date, I can then click Arrange, which will put all of my variables in what the system thinks are appropriate groups. So my landlord name and a few yes/no questions have been put into one group, and my tenant variables have been put into another. So the system was clever enough to know that the tenant variables don't actually, well, shouldn't be put in the same group as the others which are not repeated. So it has gone and done that. And this can be very useful just in terms of having a first draft layout, let's say. Another thing that you can do is entirely duplicate a group or page and all of the groups by right-clicking and choosing Duplicate. And you can see that I get a copy group with copies of my tenant variables within. So if I were to create a large number of different parties, I could easily just duplicate them and then rename those variables. You'll also notice that a folder called Computable Variables has been added in version 8.7. This is just to make working within Contract Express a lot easier. We know that some people prefer working simply from the questionnaire view, and having to move back and forth between questionnaire and all variables to find your computations can be a bit frustrating. This way, they're all in one place and you can simply navigate between them. Now, speaking of new features added in version 8.7, the filters have been greatly improved. So if I go back to my list of variables and click on Filter, you can see that we have further drop-downs here. I can choose my types of variable as per usual, but I also have added filters such as, are they a computable, are they compulsory, a key question, and in particular one that comes back a lot to us in feedback is whether it is external, so whether it comes from a different dictionary. Looking at a subtemplate that I have for this lease, we can see that I have one variable that exists only within this schedule, and the rest come from my top template, the lease itself. By using my filters, I can choose to only show the variables that come from a different dictionary. And equally, I can press any of these filters a second time to say exclude, in particular, in this instance, external variable, which means that I can, again, easily identify where I've made a mistake. In a suite scenario, you would want to create all of your variables in the top template and push them into the sub-template. So it would be a mistake to have a lease date that exists only within this schedule. Another interesting filter that has been added is the ability to show only variables that you have selected within the document. If I were to select this part of the text, I can choose to filter with within selected text, and it will only show me the variables that I have actually selected. And again, this can make working on particularly complex automation a lot more easy and relevant to exactly what you're doing. Now, another really interesting and exciting development that's been added in version 8.7 is the ability to compare your templates. Looking at the template that I have now, I've made a few changes since the start of the webinar, and I can compare that against a version that I previously uploaded to the site. I will click on Template Properties, View Versions, and currently I only have one version of the lease on the site, so I will compare against that one. and I can compare the wording and the dictionary. I'll start with the wording, which shows me a pretty straightforward comparison of both of my documents. You'll all be familiar with this kind of view. And now I will compare the dictionary, which is probably what's more exciting for people, where it will show me changes made to the questionnaire, variables that have been added or removed, including a lot of information about those variables. So if you change the type of a variable or the guidance, this will show up in this document. So this is a really good way of just making sure that you know what's going on within your templates. The last bit I'd like to look at is going back to the Markup Editor. When you have a number of spans that you need to change all in one go, in this case, my footnote spans, let's say that there are hundreds of these throughout the document, and I have been tasked with actually removing the optionality surrounding this. The footnotes should in fact always appear regardless of the user's choice. You could manually go through and delete them. However, by using the Markup Editor, I will click within one of my spans, choose the outer span button to refresh the expression. And then I can choose to entirely remove it and update either selected markup or matching markup. Sorry, I've done that completely wrong. Rather than deleting it, I will choose to delete markup and choose delete matching markup. And this will remove all of these spans where they are identical, but not the content. So you will see that my footnote spans are gone, but the footnotes themselves have been conserved. As I was going into just before I made a bit of a mistake, you can also just update spans individually by editing them within the markup expression editor here. This is just a good way of avoiding typos in general. The next piece I'd like to look at is actually slightly different, and it is a new feature that was introduced in 8.6, which allows you to basically kickstart your automation project by comparing two versions of a contract. This is the Markup Wizard. So opening an existing contract that I have, I can choose to compare it against a different one. So I'll press the Markup Wizard button. And choose my version 2. And this creates a red line markup of both of my contracts. Now this contains different company information, some paragraphs are different. And what I can do from here is choose to completely remove some of the content, completely add some of the content if it should in fact not be optional. But I can also start adding variables and spans. So looking at the first change that we've got, I will simply choose to remove that from the document. And for the next change, I will convert it to a field, which we'll call party name. For this piece, I can choose to convert it to a span, and I can create a rule such as licenses yes, no. And then I can keep doing the same throughout my document. Convert to fields, and I can select existing variables as I create them. And so on and so forth. So if your template is not fully ready in terms of brackets and the rest, and you have two versions of the same document, you can just simply start automating in this manner. The really last piece I'd like to mention is just a bit of best practice. In terms of adding notes for other authors within your organizations, there are a few ways you could do this. Let's say a particular paragraph has been flagged for removal. What you could do is delete it entirely, or you could put a false span around it so that it is never included. But in terms of handover, that might not be very useful. They might not know why this needs to not be included. So you could add an author note into the document that says author note. And simply add some notes in. Another one is that you can add notes into specific variables under the usage tab. Or you can add notes within computations by using 2 dashes. And this does not interrupt the computation, nor does it get misinterpreted as part of the computation. Finally, for best practice, I would always recommend using versioning, especially if you will be wanting to use the dictionary comparison later on so that you can more easily identify those versions with those version numbers. And that's it for the automation tips. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
And thank you for your time. We hope you enjoyed this webinar.